Boa tarde, good afternoon. We are very happy that we are all in here. So this is in the scope of the Academy Plus Integration. And we are very happy that we can receive Peter Scholten in here, which is one of the main experts in the world in migration public policies. The Academy Plus Integration is a protocol of the municipality of Fundão, so an initiative of the municipality of Fundão, and we have the city council woman, Alcina Cerdeira. Thank you so much for all this cooperation. It's also a protocol with the University of Beira Interior, and we have the rector, Mário Raposo, and we also appreciate very much this cooperation. And of Iscte University, unfortunately, our rector could not come, and I'm representing the university. And she's very happy that you could come. She reads your papers, but unfortunately, she could not be in here. I will just very briefly introduce. We can see that in some academic publications, sometimes the academics just complain that the politicians do not read the academic papers. And then on the other side, we have the politicians who also complain that academics do not know very well the work of the politicians. And Peter Scholten knows very well the work of public policies and implementation in a comparative view in different countries. And so he bridges in a very rigorous way and reflexive the migration public policies. And then at the same time, we also have Paulo Pedroso commenting, who also in all the scientific publications merges academy with public policies. He was from the board of directors of the World Bank responsible from refugees. He was Ministry of Labor with the minimum income scheme also integrating the migrants, and he's a sociologist always reflecting on public policies. Peter Scholten, he was the ex-director of IMISCOE, which is the biggest and excellence network of research centers for research. And we have been the whole week speaking about the mainstreaming and alienation approach of public policies on migration. And now the best ones are usually the ones that Peter Scholten calls the no time to lose policies. And that's what we have been working during the week, how to do it in better implementing this no time to lose approach. So thank you so much for being in here. And I will just pass the floor to the City Council, Alcina Cerdeira.
Muito obrigada, doutora Cláudia. Em primeiro lugar, dizer-vos que é um prazer enorme estarmos quase na reta final deste tão intenso, mas tão importante e tão interessante segunda edição desta formação. E agradecer muito aos parceiros, porque isto tem sido possível também com os parceiros que aqui estão, o Sr. Reitor da Universidade da Beira Interior, do ISCTE, estão bem representados aqui também, hoje também acrescentando aqui o Dr. Paulo Pedroso, que já esteve na primeira edição e que foi um gosto também tê-lo ouvido nessa nossa primeira edição e correu tão bem. Portanto, agradecemos hoje também por ter essa oportunidade de estar aqui e obviamente ao nosso orador, e que isto é quase fechar, ainda não é bem, que amanhã ainda temos, mas é fechar mesmo com aquela chave. Nós aqui dizemos que é a cereja no topo do bolo. E é exatamente a nossa cereja, que temos aqui um dos maiores especialistas. É uma honra tê-lo connosco, do professor Peter Scholten, estar connosco hoje com esta plateia de pessoas oriundas dos mais diversos contextos. É de facto extraordinário também ter vindo até ao Fundão, nesta terra aqui, localizada neste contexto, no centro do mundo, Nós vivemos no centro do mundo e no centro do país e, portanto, agradeço-lhe muito dar-nos essa oportunidade para partilharmos todo o seu conhecimento e com a nossa aprendizagem, com a nossa experiência que também temos deste lado. Portanto, eu agradeço mesmo muito e aproveito já neste momento, apesar de nos sentirmos outra vez muito tristes. Ontem disse algo e hoje continuo a dizê-lo, porque estamos, de facto, a assistir a um grande incêndio, novamente, agora mais rural, com muitos hectares já herdidos e com casas em risco. Neste momento estou aqui e estou a tremer devido a essa situação, mas estamos aqui a discutir algo tão pertinente e tão importante para todos nós e espero que essa questão dos incêndios seja uma coisa que vai passar certamente, porque temos sempre esperança, e aqui volta tudo a renascer. Também há um contexto muito interessante, que eu lembro-me em 2017, tivemos o pior dos incêndios e neste momento voltámos a regenerar toda a nossa floresta e a nossa serra. Portanto, nós também falamos aqui muito de renascer e aqui também se volta a viver de uma forma diferente, que é aquilo que nós todos estamos a falar estes dias, é vir para um contexto diferente e ter a porta escancarada para receber outras pessoas e viver aqui de facto com a proteção, sobretudo da nossa gardunha, como costumamos dizer, e que significa, a nossa Serra da Gardunha significa em árabe refúgio. O contexto que nos traz hoje aqui é exatamente falar desse contexto de acolhimento e de refúgio para todos. Portanto, da nossa parte, agradeço mesmo muito a todos os que aqui participaram nestes dias, com este entusiasmo que sei que tiveram, e prepararmos para a terceira edição, não é, doutora Cláudia? Sim, mas pelo menos já pensarmos na terceira. Portanto, agradeço muito a todos, muito obrigada por terem vindo até ao Fundão para esta edição e futuras, mas neste momento são vocês os portadores para aquilo que nós todos queremos, para disseminar todo o trabalho que aqui foi feito. Muito, muito obrigada a todos.
Bom, então muito boa tarde a todas e a todos. Gostaria naturalmente de começar por comentar a senhora vereadora Câmara Municipal do Fundão, pessoal Alcina Cerdeira, e lamentar de facto o que está a acontecer no incêndio e que é sempre lamentável e por isso não temos a presença do Sr. Presidente da Câmara do Fundão e portanto é de facto algo que nos acontece todos os anos e que lamentamos, mas que estamos sujeitos e que destrói cada vez mais o nosso mundo rural e também as nossas riquezas que temos a nível florestal. Cumprimento naturalmente os senhores professores do ISCTE, a professora Cláudia e o professor Paulo Pedroso, e nas suas pessoas cumprimento a senhora reitora do ISCTE, que não está aqui, mas que de facto foi fundamental para a realização desta pós-graduação, e ela envolveu-se pessoalmente, portanto, em termos do esforço que foi feito para que isto fosse levado a cabo. Cumprimento também todos os participantes, cumprimento particularmente também o professor Peter Scholten. Thank you very much for your coming. I hope that you enjoy your stay. It's short, but okay. I hope that you enjoy. For us, it's very important to hear from you. E também cumprimento os palestrantes, todos que estiveram aqui, particularmente os meus colegas da Universidade, a minha vice-reitora, a professora Amélia, o professor Alcides Monteiro, e cumprimento todos os formandos que aqui estiveram, que acredito ganharam algo com a formação que obtiveram deste curso sobre migrações e desafios da integração. De facto, as migrações é um fenómeno que hoje em dia faz parte da nossa sociedade. Portugal, que no passado era um país fundamentalmente de imigração, hoje somos um país de imigração e recebemos, obviamente, pessoas do mundo todo. Isso faz com que nós tenhamos de estar preparados, tenhamos capacidade de os receber, capacidade de os integrar na nossa sociedade. Isso é necessário, por isso que os especialistas que tiveram aqui, e a professora Cláudia, o professor Paulo, a professora Amélia, o professor Alcides e outros, e o professor Peter, obviamente, são especialistas e transmitiram-nos, acredito, a sua ideia, o modo como temos que encarar essas pessoas e o modo como as pessoas têm que ser integradas na nossa sociedade, como devem ser recebidas. E por isso, como nós estamos sempre a aprender ao longo da vida, e hoje, e este ano, e agora nós tiramos um curso universitário, não é para toda a vida, faz-nos vir várias vezes aos bancos da escola ou aos bancos destas conferências a aprender coisas novas. E, de facto, estamos aqui todos com a grande expectativa e acho que o curso correspondeu a essas expectativas. Daí o número de formandos da primeira e da segunda edição. Já vi que há aqui já caminho para uma terceira edição, que obviamente estamos bastante satisfeitos com isso. Penso que também podem aproveitar a presença do professor Peter e fazer uma parceria. Agora desafio os meus colegas da UBI e do ISCTE para criar um projeto europeu e eventualmente estudarem esta questão na problemática das migrações e investigarem mais esta área e, portanto, será também um aspecto importante. E, portanto, a Universidade da Beira Interior, claramente como uma universidade que faz parte desta região, uma universidade que está claramente ligada ao Fundão também, porque, obviamente, a Covilhã e o Fundão são duas cidades que estão praticamente ligadas já em termos geográficos, em termos do que é a habitação, e, portanto, tudo isto faz com que nós tenhamos que pensar que a UBI, de facto, é uma universidade que abrange e se lida com todos os problemas e ajuda todas estas entidades regionais. A UBI, de facto, tem sido, se aqui a doutora Alcina disse que estávamos aqui no centro do mundo, aquilo que eu digo, de facto, é que a UBI hoje é uma universidade da nossa região para o mundo. Aquilo que nós fazemos, de facto, é de facto da nossa região para o mundo e temos conseguido, numa região onde não era tradição haver ensino universitário, onde no passado, de facto, havia a desconfiança do que é que se conseguia fazer, conseguimos criar, com o esforço de todos, da nossa comunidade académica e também dos nossos stakeholders, conseguimos criar, de facto, uma universidade que hoje, de facto, aparece nos rankings internacionais bastante bem posicionada, faz parte de uma aliança europeia e é uma universidade que hoje é uma opção de muitos para estudar que querem sair dos grandes centros e procuram estudar noutras localidades com menos, diria eu, confusão do que é os grandes centros, e tem aqui uma opção também para prosseguir os seus estudos, uma opção de qualidade, porque de facto os nossos licenciados têm demonstrado essa capacidade no mercado de trabalho em todas as áreas. Não me quero alongar mais, quero de facto dar os parabéns a todos os participantes que aqui estiveram. Espero que de facto se tenham sentido satisfeitos, entusiasmados, porque eu vi muito entusiasmo nos meus professores, nas pessoas do ISCTE, na senhora reitora do ISCTE, de facto, em tudo aquilo que foi feito para se levar a cabo, e também no município do Fundão, que claramente colaborou e pôs à disposição todos os meios necessários para se levar a cabo esta realização desta formação. E, portanto, para vocês todos, muito obrigado, dou-vos parabéns por terem chegado ao fim e acredito que agora a palestra que iremos ouvir a seguir dos nossos palestrantes irão enriquecer-nos ainda mais sobre esta temática. Muito obrigado a todos e um bom regresso depois às vossas casas.
I also would like to say hello to everyone who is online. There are several people online, and thank you so much for your time. And now I'll give the floor to Peter Scholten.
I'll walk a little bit. Okay, thank you so much for the wonderful introductions here. Make me feel already very much welcome and at home in Fundão. It will only be a short stay, but I'm certainly this will not be my last stay in Fundão. That's what I already know here. So I also want to thank the Vice Rector, Dean, the Vice Mayor for the kind words, and of course Claudia for the very kind invitation. And Claudia has been telling me great stories about the very intensive program that you have been going through. I see some people nodding already, the very intensive program. So you still look okay. So that must have been intensive, but also energizing, I hope. And I'm very happy that you can still reserve the energy to come here this evening and to listen to my talk after such an intensive week, but also because it's a Friday evening. So Friday evening talks, that's always a challenge. I see many of my students absent if I have a Friday evening lecture. So I also actually try to put in some Friday evening things in my lecture so that you don't doze off during the session, that you get a little bit of a weekend feeling. And I will be talking about my next book that I'm writing. So you get a sneak preview. It's a follow-up book on the book on mainstreaming, on which you have heard quite a lot. So I'm experimenting a little bit here, but you are experimenting also a lot. You are the real professionals who every day face the reality and all the challenges, but also great opportunities that the diverse society brings us. So I hope also that I can learn from you today, during the talk, after the talk. Everything that you can give to me would be very welcome. And also feedback on my story would be very helpful. Better now than after I have published this book. I rather hear it. I rather hear it now than later. So yeah, no need for further introductions of me. Enough has been said. Yeah. So this is already some shots on some video. I hope you know movies. You do watch movies, right? And listen to songs and get a little bit of weekend feeling. I love this movie, A Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Who has seen it? Who has not seen it? You should. You have a professional license to see the movie. It's nice and very entertaining. And it's it's an entertaining movie, but it has different layers in it. It gets you confused. And that's the whole purpose of this movie, to get you confused. And I think confusion is very important also, well, for me as an academic. If I'm not confused, then I'm not curious. If I know the answer, then I am the worst academic in the world to do a study about something. Yeah, so I need confusion. I need to be amazed. I need to wonder what will be the real answer. Then I do my research. I am a political scientist. I studied public policy, as Claudia said. But from the young years, as a young student in the Netherlands, I got confused because of migration and diversity policy making and practice. A lot of the theories that my professors were telling me didn't really work. A lot of rational theories about how you measure problems, then you define their most rational rational solution, then you implement it, and then all problems go. That's what my professors always learned, always taught me. And in this area of migration and migration-related diversities, it was far more complex. So a lot of those theories that I got from political science didn't really apply. So at that moment, I changed minds. I became more a sociologist of governance, actually very close to your work. So I started studying policy making, policy practice, but as a sociologist. So I really try to make sense. How do we make policies? Why do we make those policies in a certain way? So the provisional title of my new book is The Curious Case of Migration Governance. To really try to attract people, to confuse people first by why is this at first phase such a strange policy area. It is a policy area that behaves itself so much different than when you are in infrastructural policy or in economic policies, far more rational areas. And how can we understand that then? How can we start from that confusion to try to make understand it? This is also why your jobs are so incredibly interesting to me, to society, and hopefully also to yourself. I mean, the fact that you are working in this area says something about you. You don't shy away from a challenge. You don't let complexity trump you, and that you choose an easier topic, because there are easier policy areas to be active in, with more ready-made policy models, ready solutions. You just implement them in a rational way, and then I make a little bit of a caricature out of it, but areas that are less complex than migration and diversity. So I have great admiration for what you're doing. You have a lot of knowledge. Practical knowledge, professional knowledge is incredibly important to this area. You have more knowledge on how to operate, how to do integration than I have as an academic. So I really want to learn back from you and then give that a place in my book on what the operational logic is of the real policy practitioners in this area. So I'm not the Einstein here, you are the Einsteins. You are the Einsteins of integration governance. In your everyday practice, every time somebody comes to your desk and you are in a labor organization and you need to find a proper job or find a proper training for a person, every time you need to reinvent the wheel. And that will probably be exhausting to many of you. Many Friday evenings, you'll probably be quite tired in this policy area, but it does make it very innovative, very attractive, and very important for society. So you are the Einsteins of this world. So one of the big confusions that I have in this area is that we are constantly talking about crisis. Not here in Fundao. I've heard that already. This is a shiny example of how you can also look at the positive side, how you can make migration and diversity work. But if I look at public debate, media debates, political debates, as an increasingly large number of countries throughout Europe, then there's constant reference to crisis. Everything is in crisis in this area. And crisis has become the new normality. It's the migration crisis that now everybody is talking about, the asylum crisis. A short while ago, we had the integration crisis. We had the multicultural crisis. So there's almost nothing in our policy area that seems to be not in crisis, or at least never in crisis. The refugee crisis, of course, in Europe, I almost forgot that. There are also many concepts that we use that tend to be very contested, that we don't agree on. A term like integration nowadays is a rather contested concept. A term like climate refugees, if I listen to my sociological colleagues, they say, well, it's very clear, if you look at most humanitarian migrants in the world, most of them are actually climate refugees already. But this is not a legal term. It's a term that we don't accept, we don't recognize. So that leads to confusion. How can there be this, not so large scale actually, but relatively large scale humanitarian migration for climate reasons on the one hand, and on the other hand, that our policies say, no, that doesn't exist. We don't recognize it. And it's just an example of how difficult it is to grasp a topic like migration and diversity. And your language, and I'll come back to that multiple times in my talk, your language is incredibly important. Language matters. Language also constitutes what we are studying. Language has effects on real people. Language does not just describe what's out there. Language creates also what is out there. It can be an opportunity and a threat at the same time. I'll skip the politics because nowadays it's so obvious. And I come from the Netherlands, so I am very happy to be here rather than in my own country at this moment. So yeah, this is my confusion. What crisis and why? And why are we talking about crisis? If I look here in this room with the real people working in this area, I don't think you are in crisis. Right? Are you in crisis? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Oh, okay. Okay, today, no. Okay. But do you feel that you are addressing a crisis topic? Yes, yeah. Can you say something about that? Yeah. So everything is a crisis. You mean everything that is a challenge, is new. I like that. Yeah. If that's the interpretation of crisis, then you have me. I'm with you. Then I am in crisis. Happily so. Yes? Yes, yeah. And what do you think that's the distinction, how the distinction is being made now? In public debate, so if you read the newspapers, turn on the TV. Yes, yeah. That's very interesting. I like the distinction, because although urgency is also a social concept, a social construct, so what can be urgent to you can not be urgent to your neighbor, for instance. But I'm not a relativist as a scientist, to be honest. So there are facts out there. And if you look at a lot of what we call the asylum crisis, cannot really be justified by numbers. The refugee numbers in Europe are historically not so very high. In some places in Europe, they're a little bit higher than in others, but historically, not really exceptional. So there's something else that apparently is creating this crisis sphere. So let's go there. I'll talk a little bit about what crisis is and why, and then also what to do with it. And then I leave the floor also to the discussions, and then to you to tell me how you work in that everyday crisis situation. I'm very curious about that. And whatever you say will make it into my book, perhaps. That is possible. So this is my second movie link. It's a Spider-Man or Superman. Oh, I have young kids. I should know. And so, what migration crisis? What is it then? Actually, this migration crisis. Then, is it in the numbers? No, not really. You again, I don't want. Yeah, I don't want to make this too constructive. So for some people, some numbers may always feel high, yes or no. It can be subjective. But are numbers historically much higher than in the past? That's just simply not true. Especially not when you control for size of the population. Then you could say we had a peak in 2015, and now it's also a little bit higher in Ukraine. But those are only peaks. That's what we often look at. If you look at the averages, humanitarian migration is relatively stable and has been stable for decades. And also there are no reasons. If I read up to my migration sociological colleagues, there's no reason to believe why humanitarian migration would relatively increase. So yes, when something goes wrong, like a war, people will flee. That's always the case, but they don't do that more now than they did that a century ago. And also a century ago, people could migrate quite far, but you're Portuguese, you know how easy it is to travel large difference. Is it new? I already spoiled that one. No, it's not new. Migration is an ancient phenomenon. I come from the Netherlands. Without migration, the Netherlands is just a stinking swamp with no people. Very wet, very rainy, not very exciting. So without migrants, not a lot going on. I come from Rotterdam, port city. I landed here in Porto, also a port city. What would a port city look like without migrants? Probably one of the most boring places that you can ever find. So migration has always been there and makes cities thriving places. So there's nothing new. This is very important because you are frontline workers, you are experts in this area. So also try to push back. Every time people try to believe you and try to make you believe and construct this narrative as if what is happening now is super exceptional. Because this is what makes people afraid. Then they say, oh, we are afraid because it's entirely unprecedented, which it's not. It's ancient. Oh. And is it bad? So is migration, diversity, is it bad? And then, if I turn on the TV in the Netherlands, then it makes me feel bad if I look at it. And then if you follow political development, I had just come from Sweden, the stronghold of civilization, you could say. But even there, things are changing very fast. But is it in itself very bad? No, it's not. We have always had anti-immigrant discourses. Always. And they come and go. And sometimes they are a little bit stronger, sometimes they are a little bit weaker. And one of the reasons why they are now very strong is because societies are so incredibly visibly diverse. So those narratives are on a defense. And when you are, I mean, don't know about you, but I sometimes get defensive when I'm being accused of not doing the dishes or something like that. So when you are defensive, you become more radical. And that is what is going on. The pro-migration stance is still very powerful. Perhaps so powerful that it triggers very fierce anti-sounds. So this migration crisis, is it in the numbers? Is it new bad? No, it's nothing of that. So what is going on then? Because we should also not say to the world, oh, there's nothing going on, and just go sleep and it's all nothing. I think there's something else going on. And here, I'm happy to have selected a sociological, every scientist has heroes, people that you read, and then you, after that book, you never see society in the same way. And I had it with Ulrich Beck's book, although it took a while because he writes terrible books. It's just, you can't really read it. You have to read it 3-4 times and then you still don't get it. I don't think I get everything that he says. But it was very prophetic what he wrote, a book about the world risk society. And the world risk society is just a globalized society characterized, that's most important for today, by an incredibly high degree of complexity. The incredible high degree of social complexity. And that is very important. That's what's going on in migration and migration-related diversities. The topic that you are dealing with are characterized by an incredibly high degree of complexity. So that's where the challenge comes from. That's where it makes it also different from agricultural infrastructure policies, economic policies. This makes your work field exceptional. What makes it a crisis is that this complexity hits, is confronted with a very much more rationalized, simplified, I would say, simplified view on how you should manage it. So it's one of the areas where you get black and white solutions, very simplistic discourses. Oh, we get more migrants? Oh, then we build a wall. Everybody, also Trump, knows that walls don't work. And then you still build them. That symbolizes the simplicity behind a lot of wishes that are being exposed on you in policy practice. That's also why you, in policy practice, why your job can be so hard. There are no standard solutions, no standard models that you can just take and just implement them time after time, like routine work, like factory work. That's impossible. But the idea, the political idea, the public idea, and reproduced by media, ideas that migration is very simple, that you can stop it very easily, that diversity is very simple, that you can fix integration very easily. That's what makes this topic so contested and so complex. That's what makes your life sometimes hard. That's what creates a crisis feeling. Not migration per se, but constantly being exposed to simplistic narratives that don't work in reality. And then the crisis is because simplistic solutions don't work. That's why I often talk about a crisis in our asylum regime. I don't talk about a migration crisis. I don't see substantiation for a migration crisis. I do see that the Dutch asylum system and the European asylum system are not working, but that's because we are designing them to not work. So it's a crisis by design. It's not a crisis like an act of nature. Okay, so then what is this crisis? I distinguish three. So if I try to deconstruct the idea of crisis, I distinguish three different things. I say diversity has become very complex, not more diverse, but differently diverse. I think I say the second part will be that migration has changed in character, not more migration, but different migration. And the third will be that the configurations of migration and diversity are very contingent, are very different in different locations. Even between Fundao and Porto, probably it's no longer meaningful to adopt a similar approach. Two different places, two different histories, two different economies, two different cultural settings. That means two different policies. It makes your life harder, but it makes for better policies in the end. So the first aspect is this diversification of diversity. So we haven't become more diverse always, not always, some cases, but our diversity has changed, a diversification of diversity. So we call that with a nice word, super diversity. Our societies have become super diverse. And I've heard that in Fundao, there are already more than 70 nationalities here in Fundao. That is a characteristic of super diversity. You can no longer say, oh, migrants, okay, that's the people from Brazil. Or migrants, okay, that's the people from Morocco. And then all the others, yeah, no, there are no others. No, diversity has become very diverse. Many different groups, many different people coming from different places, and intersecting on many different variables. So where you come from is no longer just what characterizes your position in this diverse population. So the fact that you perhaps are from Brazil is not really defining your position. And so we don't start from ethnicity or from background. We look at across a multitude of variables. So we look, for instance, at country of origin. We look at language. Language matters. Do you have access, proximity to the language community of the country that you are part of? Religious diversity, migration status. So what is your, look at Ukrainians, have a secure status, but also insecure in a certain way. Not a, I don't know, Portugal, permanent status? No, temporary protection status. Some migrants have no status. Some migrants have a permanent residency status. That matters to your position here and how you orient towards your future, perhaps more than your ethnicity or your background. Gender is very important. Are very gendered patterns in migration and very gendered patterns in how people integrate into society in terms of choosing for work, choosing for other careers, or experiencing it as easier or rather less easy to find work in certain sectors. Space and place matter. So where do you arrive as a migrant? Do you arrive in a place where you have people that you know, that you can create a community feeling for you? Do you arrive in places with a thriving economy so that you can have access to jobs, a place where there are schools that you can have access to? That matters a big deal. But also economic position and class. This is incredibly important. Many topics that we see at face value as a migrant topic still are class topics. If you look very carefully, class or education, those two variables are often more important than your ethnic status or what your migration status is. What is your class status? And what means do you have to be an agent in your own life, in your own personal career? What means and resources do you have? Cultural resources, economic resources also. What means do you have to advance in your life? So when we talk about super diversity, we do not automatically problematize migrants. That's not where we start. We start from, is there a problem? And what does that problem have to do with? That's another slide. I'll come to that later. Intersectionality, that is the intersections between these different type of variables. And that's where usually we are targeted nowadays. So migration status per se is not a problem. Many migrants that live there, our agents can master their own lives. Migrants can be very strong people. Actually, you have to be very strong in order to be a migrant. You have to be very courageous to make that step. But for some migrants, migration status, ethnicity, religion, gender, class come together in a way that they do need help. And that we also need to make an investment in those populations. And that's also how we need to target our policies in a much more precise way. Migrant communities are rarely the problem. Problems originate for migrants because of intersections. So moving beyond what Nina Glick-Schiller and Ayça Chagla called the ethnic lens. They say we should no longer approach migrants on their ethnic basis. Doesn't mean that ethnicity is no longer important, but we should not take it at face value, that ethnicity is the problem. That's also not how migrants experience it often. So here, a little map from my own city, which I deliberately messed up a little bit, because it shows also the superdiversity points. That in my city, Rotterdam, you can no longer really say these are the migrant groups, the Turks, the Surinamese. Those are the classical migrant groups in the city of Rotterdam. But there are so many groups coming from so many different parts of the world that it doesn't make sense to have, for instance, a target group specific policy. Even if you want to, it would not be possible. There are too many groups that are of larger size than 5,000. And if you look at first and second generation backgrounds, migrant backgrounds, then it's the majority of our population. So that means that concepts like majority and majority doesn't make sense. You could say we are all a minority, but I find that a populist statement in itself. Because then you say that everybody is minor or is in a, yeah, it is a normative judgment. I would say let's bury the concepts majority and minority. It no longer works. And if in a place like Fundao you have more than 70 nationalities, then it doesn't work here either. It's no longer meaningful to talk about it in that way. There's one in between. Oh no, there's no in between. So how do you work with it then? How do you work with superdiversity? There are quite. I'll keep the debate for after the talk. But there are some methods on how to approach superdiversity in a very productive way, and I hope that I can learn from you in doing that as frontline workers. One thing is to demigranticize. So if there is a person in need of help, a family in need of help, a neighborhood in need of help, then never start from the migrant status. We call that demigranticization. So we don't look at migrant status first. We first look at what is your need. Problems is not a foul word. If there are problems, we talk about it. So if there is a problem, let's look at the problem. And what is the problem? Is it language? Is it access to school? What is it? Is it discrimination? And then you target discrimination. And if discrimination is ethnicity-based, then ethnicity comes in. Superdiversity does not mean that ethnicity does not matter. It says that it can matter, but you should always examine how, why, when, and in what setting does it matter. If you put it more radical, people from this school of thinking say that if you always approach migrants, the problems that migrants have as migrant problems, that is a form of discrimination. Then you reify, then you combine the idea of being a migrant with being a problem. And that's what, for instance, in my country, we've had very intensive minorities policies, starting out of good intentions, but always colliding the terms problem and migrants. And that's something that we should stop doing in this approach. The second part is not only diversity has become more complex, but also migration has become more complex. That does not mean more migration. I keep repeating it because it's very important that we push back against that narrative. Even my own mother does not believe me when I say, Mom, there are no more refugees coming in than in previous decades. And I'm one of the 4 Dutch migration professors. I don't say that to her, that, oh, then I should know it. That's not how I bring it. But she does not believe me. She really doesn't. She believes what is in the media. And in the media, there's this constant banging on this topic of, oh, we are being overrun by humanitarian migrants, by refugees in particular. She believes them, not me. So I keep trying, but I don't want to ruin every family dinner, every family party And my wife kicks me then under the table and says, I want to have a nice time. So sometimes I leave the professor not at home, but in the office. So, but migration is changing in character. So what was not the case in the 60s, 70s, 80s is the case now. That means that migration becomes more mobile. So you do move more often. You do remain in contact with other countries more often. Guest laborers, you were, Portuguese people were guest laborers, but also received them. Then the idea was that people will always stay and settle. That's no longer the case. People do move back and forth. This idea of a migrant leaving one place, going on a journey, and then settling in another, that is no longer what we sociologically observe. We do see people moving on, moving back, and we see many people just not knowing it. This temporality, this uncertainty of whether you are staying or going, that's another hint for what comes later in my, that is typical nowadays for what we see with migration. Our societies then are also, it's also very important, we are not immigrant societies. We just are not. That's not factual, just not true. We are increasingly floating societies. So people move in and people move out. And I looked at the figures of Portugal. Your emigration levels are a little bit lower than immigration, but not so much. So Portugal is not an immigration society. You are a migration society. People move in and out. It's very important to be aware of that. And the types of migration have diversified. So it's not just labor migration, not just family or love migration, humanitarian migration, student migration, apparently very important here also. There are many different reasons why people migrate. I'm not a lawyer. Are there legal people in the room? Okay. Shut your ears a little bit. It's always one of the big fights I have with legal people, that I understand the importance of legal categories like asylum migrant, labor migrants, family migrants, but sociologically, it's always, one big mixture of migration motives, with the exception of war, refugees, and there you can really say, okay, this is humanitarian. But in most cases, it's a little bit of many things. It's a little bit fleeing for economic circumstances, a little bit excitement, adventure, a little bit looking for better labor opportunities, better educational opportunities. It's that combination that makes people a migrant. So I think these legal categories are simplifications that make the management of migration very hard, and make it for populists sometimes very easy to reject people, because then it's like, you don't fit in that box. Yeah, most migrants don't fit in one box. That is just a reality. So this book, Polish Peasant in Europe and America, I think all migration sociologists know it. I studied it when I was a student. We should no longer use it. It's not relevant anymore. This is an immigrant society. This is a group leaving one place and settling in another. That's no longer, that's history. This is no longer true. So that has changed. Just very brief. I should show this to my mom, probably. And say, Mom, this is facts, figures. This is not me, this is Eurostat. They are very clever, cleverer than me. If you look here at asylum and other, it's quite steady. It's not very high. Also, I have to be careful with that, because I made that mistake to journalists. And then the journalist said, oh, you say humanitarian migration is not high? And then I said, no, we have far more labor migrants and we have far more love migrants. So the headline, imagine what the headline was the next day. Scholten is warning for a wave. I have never used the word wave. A wave of labor migration to Europe. So you have to be very careful. But humanitarian migration is not very sizable, has not increased a lot. And this has 2015 in it. So this has the refugee crisis in it. So I love romantic movies and fairy tales, but if you are a scientist, then we don't want to believe in fairy tales. Sometimes at some point we are past that age. Another one from Rotterdam. I tried to compile these figures for Portugal. I didn't manage. Please, yes. But it shows for Rotterdam, blue line, immigration, red line, emigration. It increases in almost the same pace. So Rotterdam is not an immigration city. Don't know whether you know the book of Doug Saunders, The Immigrant, so Arrival City. He now travels around the world in his private jet talking about arrival cities. Don't listen to him. Those cities, none of the cities in his book are arrival cities. People don't just arrive there. They arrive, stay some time, are often very uncertain how long, and then they move on. Because that's what big cities do, and big cities have always done. Cities have always been floating cities with floating populations. This is not new. And this is just something that people don't like to see. So here's the song, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Yeah, I promised a Friday evening feeling. This is if you go to the club in Fundao later, I hope that every time that you hear this song now, you'll remember this. This is characteristic, this is new, this is important for your work. Because many of your migrants are not migrants in a classical sense. And my hypothesis is that most of them, certainly a majority, perhaps even up to 80–90% of them, are not entirely sure about how long and whether they stay. Even when the kids go to school, kids go to secondary school, even then nowadays, and this is different from the 1980s, 90s, last century, they still don't know. And this temporality, this uncertainty about temporality, as we call it in migration scholarship, that is very typical. And for your work, it's very important to make that part of how you approach migrant families. So don't just assume that they are there to stay and to integrate. So that may be sometimes that assumption that they need to learn Portuguese is not valid. I use a provocative example on purpose. So in Rotterdam also, many migrants who come there, there's no need whatsoever to learn Dutch. Because you can operate in English everywhere, and most of them move on anyhow at some point. So why would you learn Dutch? I know some people speak Dutch in the room, and it's great that you can do that. But it's a tiny language and not so much used even in our own country. So it depends on the choices that the family make themselves. So don't impose assumptions about temporality on migrants because they have become very complex and certain. Okay. That is one back. Yeah. And the last one, let me be very brief about that, and then I go to what to do about it. Is contextuality. So this is where in the book I'm still doing my field work. That's why it's less fancy. I couldn't find a nice movie about it yet, about contextuality. Oh no, I did. I actually did. I Googled the end of models. So now I have a virus on my computer probably now. Because the point that I want to make there is that there are no grand models in how to apply, how to do migration and diversity policy anymore. So all these great books that got me into migration studies on multiculturalism, on interculturalism, this is no longer how it works in a complex society, that there's one model, one normative model that you can impose everywhere. It's not that simple. So migration and diversity are configured in very different ways in different places. And there's no need to really understand all the axes there in our book. Then you should read it later. What is most important here is also an example that I gave earlier, Fundao versus Porto, Porto, Lisbon, port cities, Rotterdam, Porto versus capital cities. They have very different configurations of diversity, types of migrants coming, different temporalities, different design of the city. For instance, port cities like Porto and Rotterdam are always segregated cities because you have these old working class, harbor working neighborhoods there. In any port city, you'll find them. So that means that the landscape of integration in Porto is fundamentally different from cities that are not port cities. So you're dealing with another situation. So you cannot impose one model on Porto and on another city that does not have that type of social economic segregation in how the city is designed. You need to take that into account. So that makes your work, again, more important. I'm not here this evening, unfortunately, to make your life easier. But I just hope that you understand better why your policy practice is so complex, why it's so hard, and why you need to be Einsteins in order to do your work properly. I hope that when you go home after this session, that you're very proud, that you say to your partner, you know, we are Einsteins. And that's why working in migration is great. And I didn't choose a very stable career in infrastructure. I chose migration, and that is actually very good. It's courageous of you. And in our language, we call it a shift from government to governance. So there are no standard government models that you can impose. You need to do governance. In your work, you need to interact with migrants, NGOs. Many of you are from NGOs. Governments are still a part of it, but just one actor in a very broad network. And they need to manage that network. And that is very complex, but that's another book. So what are we going to do about it? That's part 2. What are the consequences of it? And what can we do about it? That's the last part of my talk. And here I am not the pioneer. There are many people who are now thinking about how to make policies for this complex world. Great books like Verwey and Thompson about how to address climate change in policies. I think I like it as one of the topics that exhibits almost equal complexity to migration. In the past, also gender, how you work with gender in society is also incredibly high complexity. So those are areas where there are already great studies out there that I've learned a lot from, that I built much of my narrative on. So this is mainstreaming work, but I have heard that you have been applying my mainstreaming work already. Mainstreaming is a complexity approach. It really is borrowed from environmental mainstreaming, gender mainstreaming literature. It also takes its errors with it, its lessons, let me put it like that, with it, but it is approach in how to develop a complex policy approach. With complexity, you can't just say, I would be a very bad academic if I would come in and say, it's very complex, and just leave it at that. Complexity is something that does not mean that you cannot do anything anymore. It rather says that when you do something, you have to do it in a different way. And mainstreaming is one of the policy approaches how to do it. So what does mainstreaming mean? First of all, it says migration and diversity are no separate topics. So you should not silo it. Also not in your organization. Migration and diversity should not be a bunch of people at the end of the corridor who do everything on migration and diversity. It should be everyone's responsibility. So when you make educational policies for Fundao, you need to think about migration and diversity. When you make economic policies for Fundao, you need to think about migration and diversity. If you are an NGO working in labor promotion, in a labor market organization, then you need to think about migration and diversity. Not that everything that you encounter has to do with it, but the knowledge on how to cope with migration and diversity needs to be with you and not with somebody at the end of the corridor. It needs to be mainstream, just like gender. I'm just old enough to remember that I entered my first university as a PhD student, and that then gender was a group of people really at the end of the corridor. So when we had something coming up around gender studies, then we said, oh, there we go, and have fun with it. Just imagine that you would do that nowadays. Gender is now about everything that we do. It's about economy, about the media, about society, about everything. Migration needs to be a part of everything that we do. The percentages in the population in major cities are also the same. They are like gender relations, 50-50. In my city, they are 50-50. In Lisbon, they are 50-50. Porto, they are 50-50. So it's important that also size matters here. So it's important that mainstreaming means that we make our general policies diversity and mobility proof. So we make sure that everything that we do is equipped to cope with migration and diversity and to cater optimal outcomes. We also don't target policies anymore just at migrants. This is the demigrantization also. So the idea is not just to help migrants to get a better life also, but in order to get there, sometimes you need to address the whole diverse population. Think about discrimination, prevention of discrimination. Think about developing intercultural skills. Imagine that you're a CEO of a very big company, catering to a very super diverse society, and you have no intercultural skills. Then you would be in major trouble nowadays. So it's very important for everyone to have skills how to deal with diversity. States remain important, but are not the key actor. So states are not the ones who fix migration and diversity. They do that in a very broad network with you in it, with NGOs, with professionals, with practitioners from many different areas. Mainstreaming is not a model. It's not one model that you can apply everywhere. In every setting, you apply mainstreaming in a different way. So it's not something that you can read in a textbook and then you check all the tick boxes and then you have mainstreaming. No, in every context, you need to interpret how to do mainstreaming in an optimal way. So this is mainstream, but you have been applying it already. So they have read the material mainstreaming? Okay. So you've seen then also examples of mainstreaming, like making it part of social economic policies, making companies also more important for migration and diversity management. And this is, I'm involved in a very interesting project in the Netherlands, where together with ASML, so they build the machines that create chips, semiconductors, and they bring a lot of migrants. They need a lot of migrants. And in the past, they just brought migrants and they said to the city, hey, you take care of education, housing, and you have fun with that. We just take the labor capital of them. But nowadays, we are working ASML is working very hard with NGOs, with migrants, with city to arrange housing, for instance, for migrants, to arrange schooling. So working with the private sector should not be a dirty word when we are doing migration and diversity management. If I'm being a little bit provocative, then a lot about migration is economics in the end of the day. And most migrants migrate for economic reasons. And a lot about integration is economic as well. So finding proper work and being an agent of your own life is very important. So we should not leave out big business and small business and medium business. They are a key actor also in migration governance. Okay, I'll skip for time's sake. I skip the other examples because I am very curious to hear your examples of mainstreaming, and perhaps they show in my next book. So mainstreaming is theory. It's not one model. It's not one model, but it is theory. What we see in reality, and with me, other political scientists who are studying in this area, we see that it is often not applied in a very good way. We see that policymakers are still struggling with this concept. That's why this concept often develops this crisis sensation, because policy practitioners don't get the right tools in order to really address the complexity of the situation. And then some people talk about policy alienation, some people talk about policy pathologies, policy failure, and some people talk about the concept crisis. And for me, that's where the crisis comes from. Not from the sociological reality of migration. The crisis comes from the fact that many of the things that we have in mind about migration and the many tools that we think may work don't work. And that creates a crisis sensation. So what can you do? So how can you come actually to complexity governance and mainstreaming? And how can you prevent crisis or the various forms of policy alienation? I will address them in the last part. So what can you do? So let me now come to a more, I've been a little bit critical here and there, a little bit cynical, a little bit provocative here and there, but you should never do that without saying something constructive. So what can I give you as message to make your policy practice, to empower your policy practice even further? And this is the part that's going to be entirely new in the new book. So all feedback on it is welcome. What we want, what I want in the book and my school of thinking is to bring quality back into how we think about migration and diversity policy making. We want to make this policy process and the involvement of migrants, of experts, of professionals more robust. And we think of quality along 4 different lines. Rational quality. So is the way that you operate in policy practice sufficiently based on sound knowledge and information? Democratic quality. Do you talk with and do you engage the right populations and communities? Institutional robustness. Do you have the institutional tools to do what you want to do? Or is there an institutional gap? And discursive quality, discursive robustness. So do you have the language, the language toolkit to achieve what you want to achieve? Or can you also communicate what you want to achieve in a convincing way? Those are the 4, I would say, 4 tools in your toolkit. The 4 aspects that you need to look at when you make policies, when you design policies in this area in order to achieve complexity governance. So let me look at those 4. Rational quality is really to prevent problem alienation, to prevent that you lose sight of the problem that you are actually wanting to solve in your policy practices. Ryan and Schoen, very famous sociologists in this policy area, call this always having a serious conversation with a problem situation. And that is important, because we have seen already quite a few examples where you can't just take for granted that there are problems because of numbers of migrants, for instance. Or you can't just take for granted that a family has a problem because of its ethnic or migration status. So every time you face such a situation, you need to examine it. That's not easy. It doesn't make your life simpler, but it is very important. It says something about the rational quality of how you implement, how you do your policies. That means also having proper research policy dialogues. So my work needs to be relayed to you, and your work needs to be relayed to me. And that needs to be an ongoing conversation. That is also very important, because nowadays the relationship between migration policy practice and migration research is really becoming more contested. Horizon Europe, for instance, is cutting most financial schemes towards migration-related topics. Science foundations are cutting funding to migration topics at a massive scale. So this risks knowledge production. And knowledge production is important in order to make sure that you get the facts that you need in order to do policy practice. If you have the knowledge that you need, then you can debunk myths. And I will do in a minute a little bit of myth busting together with you. Another tip in terms of rational quality is to be critical of ethnic statistics. Ethnic statistics don't really give you the full story. My country is a champion in collecting data about migrants. There are whole reports that say, this is a report about the Moroccans in the Netherlands, and let's look what is wrong with them. And then you get all these statistics about their educational achievement, crime, labor, and then the end of the story is always the same. There's a problem with Moroccans, we need to do something with them. So be careful with how you treat ethnic statistics, how you treat ethnic data, because that may not be experienced as such. Problems may not be experienced as such. If you present ethnic data, facts, and groups in one line, that can also contribute to the discrimination of groups, creating a narrative that there is something wrong with a certain group. You don't want that. And yeah, let me not skip that one. It's the economy, stupid. If you look rationally at a lot what is going on in migration and diversity, and I think we perhaps are also not talking about that often enough as migration scholars and as migration practitioners, economy is a big part of it. It's a big part of what is success and what is not a success in integration. It's a big part of why people migrate. So economics should matter in how we address migration-related diversity. So some myth busting. So this is the final movie shot that I give today. The Ghostbusters, I always have that feeling. As a migration scholar, I increasingly have the feeling that I am a ghostbuster. Perhaps I should tell that to my mom. I say, well, I actually did achieve something in my life. I am now Ghostbuster. And my ghosts are the myths around migration and migration management. And I am busting them. So let me take one. The quantity of migration. Why do so few people move? So what we often do is we always ask the question, why do people move? Why are there so many migrants? And we built this in as a sort of an assumption. And the media also constantly reproduces that image that there are so many migrants. I start my first year lectures nowadays with the question, why do so few people move? What do you think that the percentages of the world's population living today that has moved internationally? What do you think? Guess. Just shout something. What? You are great. You're a star. You give next year's lecture here. Then indeed, it's only 3%. So what migration crisis? Why do we always then create this narrative that many people move and that we want to understand why? The question is, if there are so many wars, if there so much inequality in the world, why are there so few migrants? What is holding them? What is holding us from migrating? That's the question. So this is myth busting already. This is the first myth that I hope next time that you are interviewed by media or you write something yourself, don't reproduce that myth. Because it's so easy to fall, or when you talk with your mother, please help me in modern myth busting. Focus on refugees. Yes, also this obsession with refugees. It's incredible that every migrant will be a refugee, and refugees are a problem, and refugees this and refugee that, and we are also reproducing it. Now we create a field, refugee studies, as if refugees are something different than migrants. Refugees are only a small part of global migrants. And that is a difficult statement to make because you could say people are economic refugees, and then actually many people are refugees. But economic refugees is interpreted often in a very populist way. So I don't want to go in that direction. But most migrants migrate for love. Family migration, love migration. I don't see that being problematized. Labor migration. Labor migration still today is by far the biggest migration category to Europe. So if you want to talk about migration, let me be less political. So if you want to talk about migration, if you want to problematize it, why don't you focus then on labor migrants? That is the most sizable category. And it also comes with a lot of forms of exploitation, a lot of forms of discrimination, a lot of problems. Almost have the feeling it's a sort of a decoy tactics. We talk about the refugees so that we don't have to talk about the refugees. That is my genuine feeling. International versus domestic, this is not very exciting. I think most of you know that most migration globally is domestic. And if you don't believe it, then go to a city like Lagos and just see the size of migration. It's incredible, and the pace, but it's domestic. It's domestic migration. And for me, domestic migration is the same phenomenon as international migration. It's not if you cross a border, then you become a migrant. No, that's a political definition. That's not a sociological definition. I've done this one already, immigration versus mobility. I think at some point, Claudia, that our field will be redefined. Then our centers are no longer described migration centers, but mobility centers. It's very likely that that's going to happen quite soon, I think. Just like we got rid of integration. Another one, development and migration. So it's a common assumption that if you want to stop migration, sometimes positive. Are there politicians in the room? No, okay, then I can, because I like politicians to invest in development. That is great. That is really good to do. But not out of the assumption that development aid stops migration. Because what happens if a country develops? What happens then? What do you think? Yes, migration increases, yes. Migration always increases with the development of a country. So what are the countries that exhibit least migration? The very poor ones, yes. Only those countries exhibit very low migration levels. So the more you develop, the more migration you get. That's almost a law in migration studies. Something that we cannot convey to countries. And we are also careful with not always conveying it, because we want countries to invest in development. Climate change and migration. And that's another myth that I hear a lot, that climate change will lead to mass migration scales. Is this a topic here in Portugal? Climate migration and the scaremongering that climate migration will lead to a lot of migration? Where? Only during the summer. Then there's the fear, yeah. Well, with this fire, perhaps if you get in a fire, then you become climate refugees at some points. No, it's tragic that that is happening, truly. So climate change and migration. Climate change is not, studies are not substantiating that climate change leads to more migration. It leads to less migration. Because climate change, the real serious climate change, deprives people of the means to migrate. And so it makes it more difficult. And then my last one, cultural monism versus diversity. We start now believing again that we are very homogenic societies, that it's very clear. Perhaps it's clear to you what Portuguese identity is. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm from the south in the Netherlands, actually, for people who know the Netherlands, so I'm not a real Hollander. So I don't really know what this common national identity is. But if you look at our diverse cities, many of them have already super diverse identities. It is already there. Okay. Then let me continue with the last part of how to build quality into your policy making. So rational quality, myth busting. The other one is democratic quality. So how to make sure that your policies are robust in the sense that you have engaged with relevant groups that you need for your policy making. It's almost impossible to design your policies in a way, yourself, top down, in a way that really takes sufficient account of the needs of the different populations that you have. And also then it's impossible to respond to the needs of the different communities that come. I mean, now there are the Ukrainians, the Syrians, there will be others. So you'll be constantly responding to new groups. You need to engage with those groups in order to develop a sound policy logic. How much time do I have, Claudia? How much time do I have left? I can do this long or short? Short, okay, then I do this short. So engagement is here very important. Democratic quality of your policy process is not, and that's very important to then take away from this slide, not defined by how well you follow the democratic instructions of governments. Yes, you need to do that. There are laws. I'm not saying that you do anything illegal. So don't put crazy stuff on Twitter after my talk. But being democratic is more than just following laws. Being democratic is also engaging with your local democratic society. And that's what you need to do. Institutional quality. Institutional quality is make sure that when you design a policy, that you also have the policy means and the institutional means to achieve what you aspire to. and that yet you are addressing your policy level, your policy problem at the right level. So some policy topics need to be tackled more at a local level. Some are more national topics, some are more European topics. And so this is really a multi-level governance topic that makes it, again, more complex, more harder to achieve a good policy, but it is something that you need to deal with. So you need to coordinate local policies with national policies, with European policies. And here, institutional mainstreaming is very important. So this tendency that we have that if we are responsible for migration, then we do migration and diversity and we leave the rest out of the picture, that does not hold in modern day migration and diversity management. So you need to have everybody on board, just like with gender, just like with climate, you need to have everybody on board to be successful. The last one is discursive quality, that is mind your language. And the only thing that I can say there in terms of discursive quality is that you need to be very mindful, very reflexive of the terms that you use. Your language is not just an objective reflection of what comes out of what clever people have designed in policies. It's not just out there. Your language can create problems, can constitute groups, for instance. It can give people the feeling that they are being excluded, or it can give people the feeling that they are being included, that they are part. So your language is an instrument. It can be a weapon that you can use in a positive way, but it can also be used in a very negative way. Language in itself is very, very political. The term integration is very important how you explain that. Is integration something that you force upon somebody? Or is integration truly a two-sided process? Does integration mean that you do something for somebody else? Or does integration also mean agency of the person? And how do you make sure that that migrant also feels empowered? And even when I say that migrant, that is already alienating. Then I already say you are other, you are different, you are the migrant. So you probably come with certain problems that need to be addressed. So be careful with language and avoid crisis talk. I think that's a very good part to stop. So my talk is round now. The Einsteins of complexity management, that is you. You are complexity managers. Complexity is not just for rocket scientists. Complexity is you. You are dealing with probably one of the most complex issues, complex topics of our times. Does that make your life very easy? No, it makes your life very hard, probably, but it is something to be proud of. It is something to be proud of that you can contribute to management, very meaningful management in such an area. And it's probably a very exciting, challenging career path. I don't expect that you'll have many boring working days. And I hope that from my talk, and later from the publication of my book, that you take with you that you should never deny or ignore complexity. Take complexity with you and try to address it. And try to be your own Einstein in finding your complex solutions for complex problems. I hope that you take that. And for all the other difficult questions that you have, raise them. And then perhaps in about a year or two, you'll find your answers in my book. That would be very helpful. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your conference. We will have some questions, but previously we will have a commentary by Paulo Pedroso. And since you also mentioned the enterprises, tomorrow in our Academy Plus integration, in this same room, we will have 4 companies here to speak about their integration practices with migrants. There will also be tomorrow, yes. We also had Capgemini on Wednesday, so this is also integrated with the enterprises. Yes, thank you.
Muito obrigado. Eu penso que nós já gastámos o tempo do comentário e metade da discussão, portanto, começo a jogar para negativos. Não, creio que a intervenção do Peter Scholten é essencialmente dirigida à voz e justifica que tenham tempo para falar, portanto vou tentar ser mais sintético do que tinha planeado. O primeiro ponto que eu gostava de sublinhar é a importância da perspectiva que o Peter Scholten nos traz, que de algum modo nos obriga a pensar, julgo que podemos dizer, a pensar assim: não há uma crise de migração, há problemas, ou se quiserem, crise das políticas de mobilidade. E que ele coloca, desafiando-nos, em torno de duas notas. Uma é a ideia de que temos que mobilizar uma governança da mobilidade, o que implica o sistema de atores que tomam decisões, não apenas os governos, mas as redes que são envolvidas na gestão da mobilidade. E outra, que é a própria mudança de palavra, da palavra migração para mobilidade, que é uma palavra bastante mais neutra, que nos coloca perante a perspectiva de que as pessoas mexem-se, enquanto a palavra migração tem uma carga muito forte sobre elas mexerem-se com as suas tradições, com as suas instituições, digamos, com o choque ou o diálogo, ou a aproximação, digamos, a aproximação institucional. Eu creio que esta visão é muito importante para quem trabalha nas políticas e que ajuda a pensar numa questão-chave que daqui deriva e que também foi apresentada pelo Peter Scholten, que de algum modo nós temos que olhar menos para aquilo que ele chamou os silos, portanto temos que retirar os silos, temos que olhar menos para as políticas concretas, a educação, a religião, a habitação, e pensar do ponto de vista dos fatores, fatores que implicarão políticas múltiplas, com esta ideia, portanto esta consequência do mainstreaming. É uma palavra que nós não temos tradução exata para português. Se quiséssemos usar uma tradução, diríamos transversalidade, ou seja, a ideia de que é em todas as políticas que esta dimensão está, não é numa política específica. Se eu fui fiel, portanto, este desafio que nos é colocado e que provocatoriamente está na expressão desmigrantizar a política, lança, no entanto, vários desafios. E o primeiro, do meu ponto de vista, tem a ver com o modo como o Peter Scholten acabou. Porque ele diz que temos que introduzir mais racionalidade a vários níveis nas políticas. Mas há algo que no processo político temos que ter consciência. A racionalidade é uma parte do processo político. Mas na política não policy, mas na política politics, a racionalidade não é tudo. E aqui nós temos uma comunidade de técnicos envolvidos, mas não é seguro que este discurso ganhe eleições. E é fácil para nós adotar esta abordagem, mas vivemos num mundo, e de algum modo é sintomático que o Peter tenha vindo falar-nos disto, digamos, nesta altura, vivemos num mundo em que um chanceler alemão social-democrata aceita falar da mobilidade em termos de reforço do controle de fronteiras. Um controle de fronteiras que tinha começado por relação a países em guerra, com esta lógica digamos, dos refugiados, chamamos-lhe assim, controlar os refugiados, que se tinha continuado com as fronteiras leste da Alemanha, se quiserem numa lógica da prevenção da imigração económica, e agora se estende aos parceiros do oeste do sul, digamos, do sudoeste e do noroeste, os países que quiserem vizinhos ricos, e com uma associação que, vista daqui, é muito perigosa, que tem a ver com dizer assumidamente que queremos controlar as pessoas, queremos diminuir o risco de crime organizado, queremos diminuir o risco de terrorismo, e, portanto, é uma política anti-mobilidade. Como o chanceler Scholten não ficou fascista de um dia para o outro, deve haver racionalidade no seu comportamento. Mas não é esta nossa racionalidade. E eu creio que isto leva-nos ao fulcro da discussão política que as nossas sociedades estão a enfrentar. O Peter trouxe-nos, e bem, o Ulrich Beck, para quem seja sociólogo, é provavelmente um companheiro, digamos, um companheiro conhecido. A visão do Ulrich Beck das novas sociedades do risco e da complexidade tem subjacente a ideia, como o Peter nos disse, que as nossas sociedades serão diversas, e eu julgo que ele não usou a palavra, mas serão cosmopolitas. Ou seja, que as nossas sociedades terão a diversidade como valores. E uma coisa é analisar esta tendência e vê-la emergir. Outra é vivê-la no nosso cotidiano. E agora, fazendo aqui seguindo a estratégia do Peter, eu perguntava-vos, desta sala, quantas pessoas nasceram num país estrangeiro? Nesta sala, quantas pessoas não têm o português como língua materna? Percebem que estamos muito longe de partir de uma sociedade em que isto é automático. E este processo de mudança que está em curso é um processo que vai ter inimigos, que tem adversários. E é aqui que eu acho que nós devíamos acrescentar, devíamos pegar na reflexão do Peter e pensar que também é preciso fazer a gestão, digamos, política desta questão. Uma colega canadiana de nome grego, portanto, Trianda Filido, escreveu há pouco tempo um paper, fez uma lecture, em que dizia que um dos grandes problemas das nossas sociedades é que temos que revisitar o nacionalismo e estamos num combate entre aquilo que elas chamam um nacionalismo plural e um nacionalismo neotribal. E esta visão que o Peter nos traz é uma visão que pressupõe a vitória dos nacionalismos plurais. O Peter diz, e eu concordo, deixem lá a exigência de falar a língua, digamos, a língua do país. Eu estou convencido que se nós não tivéssemos induzido a discussão e nesta sala fizéssemos a pergunta sobre se é importante uma pessoa falar a língua do país, antes desta conferência, teríamos um resultado esmagador a favor. E, portanto, ainda por cima, neste país, isto vai ser difícil para a Cláudia traduzir, não é? Mas que tem um poeta que diz que a minha pátria é a língua portuguesa, não é? E, portanto, o que, digamos, nós glorificamos, mas nos torna difícil ser patriota neste mundo, digamos, neste mundo plural. Portanto, este é, para mim, o desafio que eu coloco a esta discussão, é como é que nós governamos, portanto, qual vai ser a governança da transição para estas sociedades cosmopolitas. E, de novo, o Pete traz-nos sugestões que merecem uma semana de reflexão, deviam ter sido feitas no início do curso, provavelmente são muito boas, que abrem o apetite para fazer outro curso a seguir, mas estas reflexões sobre essa, digamos, sobre essa transição, a mim parece-me que têm a ver com habituar-nos, de facto, à ideia digamos, das sociedades diversas e passarmos a viver com ela. Mas prepararmos as instituições para isso. Eu não quero começar muito com exemplos anedóticos, não é? Mas peguemos só numa coisa simples. Uma cidade em que há chegada de pessoas de países estrangeiros permanentemente ao longo dos 12 meses do ano. E nesses 12 meses há sempre crianças para integrar no primeiro ciclo ou no segundo ciclo na escola. Nós hoje tratamos isso como se isso fosse um problema do professor da classe ou do ano em que a criança vai cair. E nós temos escolas em que todos os meses estamos a integrar mais uma criança de uma nacionalidade diferente, porventura de uma língua diferente. Não adaptámos o sistema educativo para ter estruturas organizadas que façam digamos que façam este acolhimento. Nem sequer fizemos formação de professores para isso. E, portanto, estamos a pedir aos professores que giram a superdiversidade com uma formação que foi todinha feita para os meninos que já estão ali desde que nasceram e que falam a língua portuguesa, digamos, como a língua materna. E nós poderíamos acrescentar isto, digamos, de modo múltiplo, e uma das coisas que me parece muito interessante na experiência aqui no Fundão é precisamente a tentar, digamos, criar estruturas para gerir, digamos, tudo isto. Mas a questão que a mim, digamos, que daqui resulta, naquilo que o Peter chama a desmigrantização, a mim fez-me lembrar, a mim que me filio na mesma linha de orientação, fez-me lembrar coisas que o Göran Terborn já anda a dizer há muito tempo sobre as sociedades inclusivas. Porque, porventura, um dos erros que as políticas migratórias europeias, um dos erros mais graves que tiveram nas últimas décadas, foi a pretexto, digamos, de fazer uma integração que criava catalogações de minorias dentro dos países. Em Portugal, nós temos uma discussão aberta, que não vamos ter tempo a aprofundar agora, sobre se devíamos ou não recolher estatísticas por raças, chama-lhe por etnias, se devíamos, digamos, aquilo que o Peter aqui nos chamou a atenção, assim, ele tem muitos estudos que nós não temos e alguns de nós, como eu, não querem ter. Porque um dos objetivos desses estudos é classificar e naturalizar. No entanto, esta é uma questão que provavelmente dividiria a sala e que divide a comunidade científica sobre as vantagens. Porque nós sabermos que há grupos étnicos ou grupos linguísticos ou grupos culturais que têm resultados diferentes pode ajudar-nos a ter políticas mais focalizadas. Mas também nos pode ajudar a estigmatizar mais, a segregar mais, digamos, a acompanhar de um modo mais negativo. Eu não tenho muito tempo, mas queria deixar-vos aqui uma coisa que aconteceu, digamos, de um estudo que o Evandro e eu estamos a fazer, e uma outra colega, a Sónia, sobre os territórios educativos de intervenção prioritária. E uma das coisas que nós descobrimos é que há uma associação negativa entre a formação de professores para trabalhar com a minoria cigana e os resultados da escola. Ou seja, as escolas em que os professores são formados para a integração de crianças ciganas têm piores resultados. Isto é só para vos dar um exemplo de quanto fácil é manipular este dado. Elas têm piores resultados porque estão em contextos desfavorecidos, porque têm populações desfavorecidas, mas se eu aplicasse cegamente a metodologia, eu diria, se eu retirar esta formação, digamos, eu não sou, deixo de visibilizar um fator negativo. Onde é que o meu ponto pretende chegar? Em total consonância com o que diz o Peter, é que a primeira coisa que nós temos que fazer para aumentar a inclusão é aquilo que o Göran Terborn chama de diluir as fronteiras. E é o oposto do que muitas vezes as políticas migratórias fizeram. E, portanto, é de criar a ideia que somos uma comunidade de cidadãos e não engavetar as pessoas e forçá-las na sua identidade, na sua liderança coletiva, digamos, criar uma espécie de subsociedades dentro da sociedade e, portanto, no fundo, nós nunca falamos com as pessoas como pessoas, falamos com as pessoas através das suas lideranças comunitárias, através das suas lideranças, nós ajudamos a segregá-las, digamos, a classificá-las e, portanto, este é um desafio para as políticas, que é o de saber se nós estamos a fazer políticas que diluem as fronteiras entre grupos ou se, pelo contrário, estamos a correr o risco de estar a reforçar as fronteiras entre os grupos. Depois há um conjunto de questões que eu não vou, digamos, aqui elencar, remeto-vos para ele, digamos, para o Terborn a pretexto disto, mas que tem a ver com a consideração, com o respeito, com a audição, com a voz e com a participação. E termino com, digamos, com isto. Se este grupo fosse o mercado de trabalho português e fosse equilibrado, 1 em cada 6 pessoas devia ter nascido noutro país. E aqui são 2 em 50. Se este grupo refletisse o mercado de trabalho português, 1 em cada 10 pessoas não devia ter o português como língua materna. O que é que eu quero dizer? É que nós, por enquanto, continuamos a falar entre nativos sobre a inclusão. E mesmo nesta turma, chamemos-lhe assim, nós não temos a participação, a voz destes grupos em mobilidade que são necessários para construir a superdiversidade, para construir, digamos, a transversalidade que precisamos para as políticas e, portanto, eu queria, aqui um desafio, chamar a atenção para isto. É também importante que nas conversas como a desta semana nós sejamos mais diversos, sob pena de fazerem-me lembrar uma coisa que me aconteceu na minha juventude, que era especialista em políticas de emprego, e um dia estávamos ao fim de 4 horas a discutir desemprego e um colega lembrou-se de perguntar à audiência: quantas pessoas aqui é que já estiveram desempregadas? E a resposta era nenhuma. Quantas pessoas aqui é que já foram pobres? Noutros seminários. Portanto, se nós não formos capazes de integrar esta voz, nós temos uma enorme tentação de trabalhar para a categorização. E muito obrigado pelo tempo. Como o sino não tocou, não gastei tanto tempo como tinha.
Thank you so much, Paulo, for broadening the conference. Muito obrigada, Paulo, por teres nos feito refletir sobre a conferência. Eu vou fazer agora em português e inglês, simultaneamente. Então, for Peter, I will ask how many people in this room, so the trainees of Academy plus Integration, are from the North region of Portugal. Quantas pessoas aqui estão do Norte? How many from the center? Quantas do centro? How many from the South, Sul? How many from the autonomous regions of Portugal, Açores? How many were born abroad? Quantas nasceram no estrangeiro? How many work with migrants? Quantos trabalham com migrantes? How many work with refugees? Quantos trabalham com refugiados? Okay, so now about institutions. Quantas são do Instituto de Segurança Social? Social Security Institute. Instituto de Emprego, Employment Centers. Authority for Labor Conditions, Autoridade das Condições de Trabalho. Health Institutions, instituições de saúde. Education Institutions, wait. Education Institutions. Agency for Integration and Migration, AIMA. Civil Society Organizations, associações. Did I forget any? Municipalities, câmaras. Yes, so you can see the diversity also in the trainees, although we need to achieve more, super diverse. Agora vou-vos passar a palavra para questões ou comentários. Sim. Ali, está ali, está ali. Quem é que quer fazer uma pergunta ou comentário? 20 minutes.
Ora bem, obrigada. Eu vou falar em português, é mais rápido. Relativamente à questão da demografia, tanto a nível de Portugal como da Europa e do mundo, e mais concretamente em Portugal, existem assimetrias, portanto, o que nos leva a pensar em políticas de promoção da coesão territorial, portanto, a diferença entre as grandes cidades do litoral e o interior. Portanto, isso é uma situação óbvia. É também óbvio que sabemos que a migração pode ser um meio para, portanto, a mobilidade neste caso, é um meio para colmatar essa tendência e essa situação, e essa constatação. A minha questão e consideração prende-se aqui com a importância de se erguerem cada vez mais políticas concertadas, tanto a nível nacional como internacional, e no caso da Europa, políticas europeias, no sentido de se promoverem boas práticas, alargando a todo o território, chegando a todo o território. Estamos aqui num território onde isso aconteceu excepcionalmente e ainda bem. Portanto, é um laboratório vivo de como se pode replicar por todo o lado, mas na era da informação ainda é muito complicado disseminar as boas ideias. Portanto, a minha questão prende-se com isso, como promover esta questão junto dos decisores e, na minha perspectiva, junto dos cidadãos, porque todos nós temos o poder de mudar as coisas e o dever, o poder e o dever, e deixar também aqui, se calhar, um contributo em termos de estratégias de bench learning, tanto locais como territoriais, sistemáticas, e hoje em dia é possível fazê-lo com regularidade e com proximidade, portanto, através das tecnologias que temos acesso, e parece-me que poderá ser uma estratégia tanto interinstituições como inter-regiões e como, portanto, a nível europeu. Obrigada.
Me first?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. This is a very good question. An important matter also in Europe. I'm happy that you asked that question, because behind or underneath this rhetoric of we're stopping migration, you see a lot of preparations actually for more migration. European Union is also very much preparing for a much larger scale rollout of blue card system as we speak. So everybody who studies the topic well knows that we will have more migration, also for demographic reasons. And what is policy-wise very important is that it goes together, mainstreamed, as I would then say, with general economic and institutional measures. So the migration as a solution to demographic issues only works when it comes also with economic opportunities, institutional opportunities. So it does not make sense to just have migration to prevent aging. That's not how it works. That can even be quite risky. So I would not make it too much a separate migration issue. If you make it an economic issue, if you make it an issue of schools remaining open, shops remaining open, cultural life remaining interesting, companies remaining attractive to settle outside the main urbanized areas, then migration follows. So the people who are designing such strategies need to think about migration rather than the other way around. So migration is not where you start; it's where you end in this type of policies. And you see this happening at many places in Europe. What works against it a little bit is that we still live, but perhaps I'm not the key expert on that urbanization is still taking place quite fast. So this seems to be a more universal process. This has to do something with, I'm not a sociologist, but I know from sociological books that 21st century societies just are more and more urbanized. So we also have to accept that if we vitalize areas, we should not run against the grain too much. So sometimes it's also not possible. This urbanization is a very strong societal force. So we probably also have to deal with demographic decline and aging in some areas and prepare properly for it. And some areas may be able to vitalize themselves through economic policy, social policy, education policies. Yeah.
I think that's what Roterdão did. Yeah. So migration was the end, not the start,
Yes.
as you said. Yes. Mais questões? Comentário?
Se não houver mais ninguém dos formandos e das formandas, que damos prioridade. Então, eu vou colocar em português, está bem? Para toda a gente perceber a pergunta. E é como não estamos agora com o serviço de tradução. Então, tendo em conta a experiência e a história na Holanda, não é? Relativamente às políticas locais, não é? Que é uma história longa, e relativamente a esta tendência que falou de etnicização e de desmigratização, não é? Que a história da Holanda nem sempre foi assim, não é? Não sei se gostaria de elaborar um bocadinho sobre o que é que já foi e o que é hoje a política pública e também outro desafio, se houver oportunidade, como temos aqui instituições diferentes, como é que isso tem funcionado na Holanda, não é? Estas colaborações em redes, se são muito localizadas, se tem uma rede internacional para partilhar com os nossos formandos.
No. I have no best practices to share. The Netherlands is an interesting case to look at because we did a lot of migranticization. So we had minorities policy and then we cuddled our minorities and we problematized. It was actually quite a racializing policy. So because you are Moroccan, you are a problem and we will help you because, yeah, you are a Moroccan problem. Then we had another term, allochthonous, which is even more, you can't really translate it because the only English translation is alien. So that's a very alienating term. And in the Netherlands, so my mainstreaming story in the Netherlands has never really gained a lot of ground. So our minorities and integration policies have been dissolved, but nothing has come in place of it. So a mainstreaming does not mean less policy. It does not mean doing less. It means more policy. It means doing more in more areas, in more places, with more vision, with more leadership. Not necessarily more money. That is the part that in the Netherlands they do like, but it is doing more. So in the Netherlands, this mainstreaming, this complexity governance has been, you could say, abused for government retrenchment. I think that's the big dangers of complexity. That's also why I started my talk. Yes, it has become more complex. And yes, many things that we do not work. That doesn't mean that we should stop trying. We should be more experimental, more innovative. Or we should not stop doing things. And I see that now with the abolition of integration policies in the Netherlands and in Europe also. I see that also our funds are being taken away. So I have no funding around integration and migration. You see, gradually now it's pushed into a corner of that there is no issue anymore. I think that's a grave mistake. So that's why I say no. There are no best practices that I can share. Well, what I do is at the European level. There you see really a big mainstreaming of migration and diversity across sectors, across education, across housing. Although in housing they don't do so much. But there perhaps it has more to do also with our policy system. That mainstreaming there is more easy. The UK has a longer tradition in mainstreaming their race relations approach, for instance. It was always taken so urgent, so serious, that it was already impacting communities and local governments, education, in a much stronger way than it was in some continental European countries that tended to problematize groups. I think in Europe we have still not gotten over our lens, our minority lens, and it's an obsession of us. We want to see groups and measure groups, and then we all with good intentions, because we want to help the groups also, but sometimes with very negative outcomes on the longer term. But I'm still waiting for all your mainstreaming examples. I didn't hear questions about, I mean, not questions to me, but tell me how we should do it, please. You have done all these assignments. Claudia has been keeping me up to date. Pictures of your presentations. So I know you have the knowledge. So share it with me, please.
Obrigada, Professor Peter.
Maybe you can say your name and institution. Sua instituição, desculpa.
My name is Daniela Almeida and a social worker in school. Eu falarei em português, por favor. Então, no contexto educativo, atendendo à diversificação da sociedade e à complexidade da mesma, que daí advém, claro, quais as suas sugestões ou a perspectiva a considerar ao nível do contexto da educação, talvez ao nível multinível? O que é que deveríamos considerar atendendo a esta complexidade e diversificação da sociedade? Obrigada.
Thank you for, again, a very important question. And I am eager to hear more from your practice as social work in education, because then this complexity is an everyday reality. What I have learned so far from field of education is that there are quite a few practices out there already that cope with complexity and also with the spreading of skills in how to deal with superdiversity. And then I come also to the point in how perhaps you cater to very super diverse population. In terms of language, you also address that. I think that's a thorny issue. So the first thing, the very positive thing is, you see, true in many European countries, I don't know Portugal, so I haven't done my homework properly. I don't know here, but I know that in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in the UK, it's not EU, but still, they do intercultural education at a very young age. So primary school, intercultural education. In some countries, they call it citizenship education. And my kids, they're now a little bit older, but they did it. And I looked at it in amazement. I mean, I wanted to be a kid again. They have these conversations about interculturality without calling it like that. So they talk about even sometimes thorny issues about people who look different and how you deal with it. And they just sit in a circle and they talk about how do you relate to people who look different and primarily who feel different or who bring different perspectives. And what do you do in that conversation? So they do intercultural skills trainings. Well, my generation had none of that. I can tell you that for guaranteed, nothing. Although Dutch society was super diverse in my time also. So that's very good. And it's part of citizenship education, that every citizen in the Netherlands, in order to thrive for whatever you're going to do, you need a basic set of skills, how to relate to people who bring different perspectives. It sometimes goes wrong. I also saw that with my own kids, where then these debates, they can, derail. And they did derail because the banlieue affairs, they happened during One of those is in the weeks that my children had that effect, and then there was really a talk about who are the Muslims, what do the Muslims think. I thought I was pretty racializing. But still, it's better to endogenize it, to make it part of education, to train people how to live in a super diverse society. So I think it's very good intercultural education, citizenship education, I like it. Language is a much more thorny issue. And we also, I mean, Portuguese is a bigger language than Dutch. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Dutch is a very tiny language, so it's very hard. Also, many migrants, you know, they don't really need it, but their children do. If you really want to interact with the rest of society, then Dutch is still pretty important. So, and then we have British schools, we have French schools, we have Arab schools even. The British school are contested, the Arab schools are very contested, it's very racialized, but anyhow. We have international, international connection schools where you gradually phase into Dutch. So you start separate. But that class is already in your, so I say it wrongly, but we have international connection classes. So all schools have this group that start with English, and then they gradually fade into Dutch. So that's not at the end of the year or in the middle of the year. No, it's as soon as possible. But you start with English usually, and then gradually you take more and more courses with the other pupils. So that's why it's connection class. Yeah, so you are only there as long as you need it to connect and get up to speed with the rest of the. But I believe you talked about it, so I'm not sure whether you
Not the problem. Yeah.
whether you want to respond to it.
No, but she knows the solution, the situation better than me.
Okay.
Quer comentar sobre isso, ou sobre a sua escola, ou alguma boa prática, ou algum outro colega? Também para darmos um bocadinho aqui a conhecer.
Uma boa prática da minha escola, é isso?
Sim.
Ao nível da interculturalidade, do acolhimento.
Sim. Ou não?
Temos investido bastante no acolhimento das crianças imigrantes, desde o pré-escolar, e no primeiro ciclo, e tem sido um caminho traçado desde 2019-20, um grande investimento, uma forma se calhar sistemática, semanal, anual, digamos, o ano letivo, e está-se a propagar, digamos, a mensagem para já no segundo e terceiro ciclo. Portanto, as crianças vão transitando de ano para ano e a mensagem, o respeito, o cuidado pelo outro, a educação intercultural, a educação interrelacional, tem vindo a crescer e, de certa forma, o trabalho que estamos a investir com as crianças, os professores participam também e acabam por ter outra perspectiva sobre determinada criança, sobre a origem dela, sobre os hábitos, e isso tem sido um crescimento mútuo nosso, adultos, dos professores que estão diariamente com eles em sala e da criança, e a compreensão de que os, digamos, nativos têm sobre quem chega. Temos aprendido bastante.
Yeah, while listening to you, translated through Claudia, two things. Yeah. Yeah, two things came to my mind. One is that also making migration history part of school programs. That is something that is taking place now.
Lembrou-se duas coisas. A primeira, da história da imigração portuguesa também, imigrações, fazer parte do currículo.
Yeah. It's now standard part of history books that our children get. And another one, it's an example actually from Denmark that Netherlands was almost taking over, but I'm pretty sure that it's no longer taken over. In the past, we gave schools more funding for children with migration backgrounds.
Deram uma prática da Dinamarca, no passado deram mais financiamento às escolas que tinham diversidade em termos de crianças migrantes.
Which was very racializing. Eh? Basically, we say your children, you're a kid of a migrant, so you're probably a problem. So the school needs more money to cater to you. That system has been entirely reformed, is being reformed, and in Denmark it has been taking place, that you no longer give more funding to schools based on ethnicity, but based on needs. So there's a standardized language test that you take every year in every school, and if there are then more children with language problems, and it doesn't matter whether you have it because your parents are a migrant, or because your parents are illiterate, or because you had to work and you never had time to do proper schooling. Your school would get more funding anyhow. And that's an example of needs-based mainstreaming that works very well.
O que a Dinamarca agora está a fazer é dar mais financiamento às escolas que têm necessidades, também incluindo os estudantes, seja em termos de necessidades de aprendizagem, seja em termos de outras necessidades também relacionadas com esta questão. Sim.
Liliana Cardoso, da Direção Regional das Comunidades nos Açores. No fim vou-lhe fazer uma questão, mas entretanto partilho já algumas boas iniciativas que o Governo dos Açores tem, não esquecendo que somos 9 ilhas e quando o Governo faz uma iniciativa tem que ser para as 9 ilhas. Relativamente, por exemplo, à educação, nós temos programas, palestras, programas informativos que vamos para todos os ciclos de todas as ilhas, com as questões de integração, interculturalidade, com poesia, com música, com cultura. Levamos imigrantes às escolas para partilharem a sua perspectiva da vinda, não é? Porque é que eles vieram, as dificuldades que sentiram e como é que as ultrapassaram. Relativamente, por exemplo, à administração pública, fazemos palestras principalmente na área da inclusão, interculturalidade, integração e o que é o preconceito e como conseguimos dar volta a esse preconceito. O preconceito está dentro de nós e às vezes eu tenho que pensar um bocadinho, será que é mesmo assim? Peças de teatros para a sociedade em geral, a parte de usar a nossa cultura, como é o caso das chamarritas, que é uma espécie de grupo folclórico em que integramos os imigrantes nessas atividades para que eles também aprendam a nossa cultura. Os cursos, por exemplo, de língua portuguesa, há variados tipos de cursos, há os que são para ter um certificado, mas nós também damos apenas para o conhecimento, e curso de língua portuguesa e cultura açoriana, para conseguirmos integrar a cultura no conhecimento uma forma de eles conhecerem também um bocadinho da nossa cultura e eles partilham também a sua. E as redes de contactos que existe, o que a gente fez aqui estes dias, estas redes partilhadas de ideias e de soluções, lá estão um bocadinho mais normalizadas. É mais fácil pegar no telefone e conseguir um apoio de alguma maneira. Provavelmente haverá mais exemplos, mas agora é os que eu me lembro. A questão é se tem, não digo que seja o país perfeito, claro que nunca não haverá, mas se há algum exemplo de um país que tenha as melhores políticas ou as políticas mais indicadas para os migrantes. Eu sei que é difícil, mas podia ser que a gente, com esse conhecimento, também conseguimos tirar algum exemplo que podemos adotar aqui.
That's a very difficult question. Yeah, I'm going to pass it to my neighbor. No, that's really a difficult question. So you're asking that. So, I mean, then I would, based on my work, be able to, I should judge now which country is best in mainstreaming. And that's very hard because what I said, there's no one approach, no one model. So what may work very well in one setting may work less in another. So I just come from Sweden, where I see a lot of welfare, social policy, mainstreaming, and it's very admirable how they do that. And it's getting more contested, so it's getting less. But the degree of institutional mainstreaming in Sweden is really great. And they haven't really siloed it in integration silos like we did in the Netherlands. So there it would be Sweden, but that's because it's Sweden. And we all love Sweden. That's great. But let me then say something very unlikely as a European, something positive about the UK, for instance. Is the UK? Yeah, I hesitate. But sometimes, let me put it as an example, just to give an example of why mainstreaming can mean very different things in different settings, and then we have very positive outcomes for the migrants who are there. The UK very liberalized market approach for migrants has sometimes not always. Let's not deny racism in the UK, but it was also one of the first countries really to wake up around racism. But it's very liberalized market approach. I know it's not popular in Europe. That's why I use it deliberately as an example here. Has been incredibly positive as for social mobility of migrants, because the market was liberalized. It was easy to have access. It was easy to have access to different jobs, to move around between jobs, easy to work in different languages. It was very flexible. And the outcomes of that for migrants were sometimes very good. And then the UK was just not American enough to have the very rough underclass formations. Because in the US, otherwise I would have taken the US as an example, it would be more provocative. But there it was really laissez-faire. So there you see migrant underclass forming. I think the UK had a quite okay compromise between the continental European approach, a little bit of regulation, not too much. So it sometimes reminds me as a continental European of this sentence, it's the economy stupid. We shouldn't go too far in that direction. But in the UK, yes, in terms of integration, sometimes had better results than the Netherlands, who has put billions into integration policies and sometimes exaggerated problems rather than created more integration opportunities through the labor market, for instance. So, yeah. So I have a usual suspect as example, Sweden, and a not so usual suspect as example.
We finish with the suspects.
Thank you, Mel.
Okay. Thank you.
Obrigada. Então encontramos amanhã aqui às 10, certo, Filipa? Amanhã ali às 10. Às 10. Até amanhã e muito obrigada.